To the Ruthenians does owe Moscow the existence of her empire, for her conquests could not have been achieved without them. By them may that empire be one day overthrown.
James Henry Skeen, British writer and diplomat.
In this video, I'd like to tackle a long-standing Moscovian myth, the idea that Ukrainians and the so-called Russians are one people.
I have said many times that I consider the Russian and Ukrainian peoples to be one people.
In my previous video, I already broke down this narrative by examining all possible ways one nation can be connected to the other. In this one, I want to approach it from two new angles. First, I don't just want to explain how we're different. I want to explain the roots of why we're different. And then I'll share testimonies of outsiders who witnessed those differences firsthand. And at the end, I'll respond to the criticism to my previous video and announce a live Q&A session. My name is Yaroslav. Welcome to my channel, Savage Sage, where we examine our reality deeper than it appears on the surface. Let's start with a brief look at history to understand how this myth came to be. I'm Ukrainian, but if you trace back about a dozen of generations, my great-great-great-grandparents didn't call themselves Ukrainians. They called themselves Rusini. This is the name that in various translations appears as Rusyns, Ruthenians, Russians, and even Russians. Such was the name of my ancestors who originally inhabited the heart of real Russia, which today is known under its Moscow-created label Kievan Rus. So technically, saying that Russians and Ukrainians are the same people would be correct. It would be much like saying Italians and Romans are one people, or Ottomans and Turks, Gauls and French, Persians and Iranians. Same people, but different labels from different eras. But if you say that today, the meaning is unfortunately entirely different, because
the greatest trick the Muscovites have ever pulled was convincing the world that they are Russians.
In 1721, Peter, the Great Duke of Muscovy, pulled one of the history's most effective rebrands and became known as the Great Emperor of all Russia. But this new Russian Empire was no more Russian than the Holy Roman Empire was Roman. Following in Peter's footsteps, Sophia Augusta Frederica, aka Catherine II, wanted to give the rebranding some legitimacy. So she ordered to come up with the new history that portrays Muscovy as the only rightful successor to real Russia. That fake history immediately became a sacred canon for the empire, and since then, every other ruler on the throne, including Putin, has worked diligently to preserve and upkeep this fragile, fabricated past. Today in Moscow Empire, you can go to jail for questioning this sacred canon. I covered the full story of this identity appropriation in my other video, The Theft of Millennia, so check it out. But the thing is, they did not just appropriate Ukraine's medieval name. They erased the Ukrainian nation from their fabricated new history, positioning themselves, the imposters, as our replacements. When Putin says that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, that's not just absurd lie. That's also an ideological foundation for genocide, because our very existence threatens the sacred lie. And to bolster my credibility among the many skeptics out there, the European Parliament issued recently a resolution that condemns the Russian regime's systematic falsification of history to justify its illegal war against Ukraine and rejects efforts to undermine Ukraine's history and identity. Many believe, and myself included, that the identity theft is what pushed my ancestors, Rusyns, to eventually adopt a new identity, Ukrainians, as a way to differentiate ourselves from the imposters. In a direct sense, Rusyns gave birth to the Ukrainian nation. This change in identity happened gradually across centuries, and one could even say that it still continues to this day, as there remain lots of Russian people in Ukraine. They have preserved the link to a state that has been gone for over 700 years. There's also yet another Moscovian myth claiming that Ukraine means borderlands, implying that it was just some territory on the fringes of so-called Russian Empire.
Ukraina means borderland.
That it means borderland.
The word Ukrainian meant that the person was living on the outskirts of the state, along the fringes, or was engaged in a border patrol service.
Muscovites want you to believe that Kiev, the capital of real Russia, suddenly became on the fringes. It's just yet another paradox created by the Allies. But if you read the old Russian chronicles, the word Ukraine basically meant a region, like a cut out from a bigger territory. And it is deriving from a verb ukraiti, meaning to make a cutout in fabric. So as time went by, Ukraine became a name for actual geographic location, a homeland where Russians were fleeing to from the Polish oppression. Such people became known as Ukrainian Cossacks, and many old maps depict just that. Ukraine pies the Cossacks, or this English map, Ukraine, the country of the Cossacks. So before you say Russians and Ukrainians are the same people, the world still needs to know the true face of the impersonators. Let's now turn to why we're different, starting with geography, which is the blueprint of every nation forming. Ukraine lies on a vast, fertile plateau, blessed with the Chernozem, some of the richest soil on earth. Legend has it, Ukrainian lands are so fertile from the countless amounts of enemies that were coming here to die from all directions. Muscovites have been coming to die here for the last 400 years at least. And unfortunately, they will keep coming until they are utterly defeated. There's just no way out of this reality. So anyway, abundance of Chernozem gave rise to one of the world's earliest agricultural civilizations, the Turpilan culture. At its peak, 1,000 years before the first Egyptian pyramid was ever built, it hosted settlements like Talanki with around 20,000 residents, which is the largest known settlement in Neolithic Europe. This abundance of fertile land later enabled the independent farms called hutor, which allowed families to live off the land. No serfdom, no landlord, no king. Just you, your land, and the liberty to live however you want. That lifestyle instilled a deep culture of personal responsibility and self-reliance. It gave birth to one of the world's first constitutions written in 1710 by Philip Orlik. Our language Ukrainian also reflects it with a phrase like freedom or death that you can see here written on a pedestal where a Moscovian tyrant once stood. But that freedom-loving lifestyle also made Ukrainians stubborn and notoriously difficult to unite. In the past, our internal discord facilitated the fall of our state 3 times. Our medieval state Russia fell not to the overwhelming force of Mongols, but because it was utterly divided by the time they came. Our Cossack state also fell due to internal turmoil called the ruin that our enemies took full advantage of. Also, at one point in history, we had this anarchic republic the size of Ireland. They had battles with the Ukrainian government. They allied with Bolsheviks against the White Army. Lenin ultimately betrayed them, opening fire on his allies the moment they were no longer useful. So, never trust Muscovites. They just have no honor. But, on the bright side, that very same stubbornness also gave us more resilience to persevere, because no outsider has the right to dictate how we should live on our land. And today we are doing our best to preserve Ukraine on the map again. Against all odds, with the support of our allies, on the 4th year of full-scale invasion, we are still holding the evil empire with our lives, tears, sweat, and blood. Now, let's take a look at the geography of where Moscovia was born. Abundant with swamps and dense forests, poor soil, short growing season, and a harsher climate. Independent living was not possible here. With dense forests to clear and poorer harvests, survival required a collective effort. Such necessity gave rise to large patriarchal communities where conformity meant survival and individualism was a real threat. And to this day, that mentality never left. Over time, history only deepened those distinctions between our societies. After Kiev fell to the Mongols, a couple centuries later, Russians self-organized into Cossack hosts, democratic warrior societies of free men located in Ukraine. The word Cossack, by the way, literally means free man in Turkish. And this ability to self-organize enabled the Ukrainian insurgency army to resist Moscovian communists until whopping 1954, with absolutely no government backing them. A true testament to our autonomous spirit. Meanwhile, Muscovy was born in serfdom, under the Golden Horde. Its people and princes did not resist the invasion. They bent the knee. They paid the tribute. They sought special permission called Yarlik to rule in their own lands. They adopted from Mongols the despotic government style and territorial expansion as core method of self-validation. And as we see today, that legacy is still alive and doing well. In fact, today Muscovy has returned into familiar kneeling position, vassalage to an Asian despot. Now, it's China deciding their fate, not the Horde. Eager to please their new master, Putin brags that his young family members speak fluent Mandarin. And to justify this new servitude, he reaches back into the past, praising how the Mongols were better than the evil West.
Let us recall what happened in the time of Alexander Nevsky. He traveled to the Horde, bowed to the Horde Khan, and received a Yarlik to rule, among other reasons, and above all, in order to effectively resist invasion from the West. Why? Because the Horde acted arrogantly and brutally, but they did not touch what mattered most, our language, traditions, and culture, which the Western conquerors sought to claim.
Muscovite society is accustomed to subordination. They were paying tributes to the Crimean Khanate up until the year 1700. They were the last in Europe to abolish serfdom. Yet, even that abolishment was just on paper. Soviet villagers remained legally bound to their collective farms until whopping 1974. Today, we see them kneel voluntarily. We see them placing their children on their knees as a gift to the tyrant's birthday. And of course, we see them lashing out at anyone who dares to stand on their feet. Because defiance exposes their cowardice, and they cannot forgive free men for it. They crave others to live worse than them, only so that they can justify their misery by saying,
"Aha, see, we live better than them. Freedom isn't worth it after all, and we are right not to fight for our dignity."
Their language also reflects the serfdom mindset, with phrases like Tsar Father or Stalin, the Father of Nations.
Путин это не просто президент. Я его называю про себя там царь-батюшка.
Неизменяемый Володя, царя-батюшки на вроде.
The state is perceived like a parent, and the citizen, in turn, is perceived like the helpless child, excused from any responsibility and completely at the mercy of the adults. Their folklore reflects this too, featuring characters like Ivan the Fool, the hero who succeeds not by hard work or merit, but by pure luck and fate. He's a man sitting on a magical stove and waiting for good things to just happen to him. In contrast, Ukrainian tales like those of Kozak Mamai emphasizes resourcefulness and defiance, earning rewards through courage and wit. We voluntarily kneel for no master, and only stand on one knee to honor our fallen heroes. And yet, despite those strikingly apparent differences, the Moscow Empire has the audacity to so blatantly lie that we are the same people. That we, Ukrainians, a nation of 40 millions, don't exist. That our language, Ukrainian, doesn't exist.
Ukraine as such does not exist.
Ukraine as a country should be forgotten.
The Ukrainian state must simply be deconstructed.
Of the so-called Ukraine is our land, and Russian people live on it, not some separate Ukrainian people.
Liquidation of Ukrainian state and transforming their population into normal Russian people.
We'll cross out the word Ukraine from history.
There is no separate Ukrainian language. We are one people, we have one language, we are of same faith.
They are not hiding the fact that they want to genocide Ukrainian nation. And all because our existence threatens their fabricated history. So they have spent centuries trying to erase us. They have deliberately starved millions of Ukrainians by man-made famine to force submission. Today, they try to force this submission by terror, daily attacking our power plants, homes, hospitals, shopping malls, post offices, hotels, universities, children's playgrounds, busy streets, and so on and so on. Hitler was using this same terror strategy by bombing Great Britain with V-2 rockets. He was hoping to frighten British people into surrender, but he failed and shot himself. And so will fail his successor in Kremlin. The Ukrainian language has been one of the most repressed languages in the world. In the so-called Russian Empire, it was illegal to publish in Ukrainian, illegal to teach in Ukrainian, to preach in Ukrainian, illegal to study in Ukrainian. It seems paradoxical to have so many bans for something that they claim doesn't exist. And here's another paradox that you can use to break the brain of Imperial Russian. Ask them 3 questions. Number 1, do you believe that Ukrainians and Russians are one people? Then ask, do you believe that Ukrainians should surrender to Putin? But then you say, are you suggesting for Russians to give up? And watch their brain freeze as their illusions conflict with reality. I'd like to welcome you to my new collection where I have assembled witness testimonials who have saw with their own eyes the differences between our societies. And for the context, it's important to know that Russia equals Ruthenia equals Rus equals Ukraine's old name, which Muscovites have appropriated. Little Russians, translated as Malorossi, is an imperial label for real Ruthenians, Russians, Ukrainians. And Great Russians, which is translated Velikorossi, is imperial label that Muscovites called themselves for a while. So now let's start from 1577, Flemish engraver Abraham de Brayun, the armor of rich nations. And by the way, every piece of evidence here has a source, which you can click. Subscribers of my Patreon have access to this document, so they could click on the source and get redirected to where I originally found this piece. Actually, this time for the thumbnail, I have used the actual engravings right here. The Muscovita cum armis equilibrius, that's Latin, and right here underneath is German. Equus Ruthenus and Der Russin Reuter, the Russian writer. So I use those on my thumbnail. I just translated Russian into Russian, Muscovitan into Muscovian. So I hope there will be no accusations about my thumbnail this time. But I don't actually believe that this Flemish engraver was the witness. I just think those are interesting distinction between two people. We can clearly see that it's not the same. And similar cases here, Italian draftsman and painter Kaisa Valesio on the ancient and modern habits of different parts of the world. And right here, he also clearly differentiates two different people. And basically he says the Russian man, and then he goes to describe the Muscovite man. And one thing that is interesting to note, he says, these Muscovites have deep hatred towards the Jews. They cannot stand to see or even hear them, which the anti-Semitism has always been prevalent in Moscow Empire. And right here, there's another text worthy of mentioning. Among the Muscovites, there is a deeply rooted culture of deceiving and abusing one another, even committing rape among themselves, unless public prostitutes are available, which are not permitted. So yeah, just right off the bat in the 16th centuries, we see clear division between two people, Russians and Muscovites. And now the actual eyewitnesses, which a lot of them are Muscovites, like this one, Muscovite official and writer Pavel Sumarkov. And right here on page 45 he says, but what does this steep shift mean in the village of Liptsi, in the last station before Kharkiv? This shift is not only in name, it visibly presents itself to the eye. Here are low, humble clay huts. Here are villagers with shaved heads, traveling on oxen. In a neat and cheerful little hut, I see different faces, different customs, different clothing, a different way of managing the household, and I hear a different language. Could it be that I have reached the border of the empire? Am I entering another state altogether? No. The empire still continues, but from here begins the land known as Little Russia. That's just one witness. Let's keep going. 1810, Ivan Dolgorukov, who happens to be, as Wikipedia describes him, Russian poet, playwright, memoirist, private consular, Vladimir Duke governor. It's a really important figure in so-called Russian Empire. And this is what he has to say about our two people. Here, between Kiev and Odessa, I already consider myself in a foreign lands, simply because I could no longer understand the local language. Out of 5 words, I'd understand only 2. And for the other 3, I had to demand a translation. If we go by common sense, I think many would agree with me. Wherever we no longer understand the language of the people, that place stops feeling like our homeland. In fact, to me, it stops being our homeland altogether. Russian editor, writer, translator, and historian Nikolai Polevoi, in his Moscow Telegraph on page 77. While traveling from Moscow southward, everything begins to change. You have come to the people entirely different from us. The pure Rus, their language, clothing, facial appearance, way of life, dwellings, opinions, beliefs are all completely not ours. And let us go further. They still look upon us with hostility to this day. The word Muscovite, and in brackets right here he writes Moskal, which is a derogatory word for Muscovites. So this word reflects our alienation from the locals. So Ukrainians were calling them that already in 1830. The word Cossack, in which the locals take pride, tells you plainly that he does not consider you his countrymen. This is Little Russia, aka Ukraine. All traces of the political independence of Little Russia have been completely erased. Yeah, they were erased by Moscow. Little Russia lived for a long time and strongly a life separate from Russia. Little Russia is worthy of its own history, which hasn't been written yet. Amen to that. Amen to Nikolai Polevoi. Next one is actually one of my favorites, Edward Clarke, and he personally has visited the Moscow Empire, and he wrote a little column in the Rhode Island Republican. At the end of his article, he says right here, approaching southern parts of the empire, the strong characteristics of the Russian people are less frequently observed. Happily for the traveler, in proportion as his distance is increased from that which has been mistakenly considered as the civilized part of the country, one has less to complain of theft, of fraud, and of dissimulation. I actually had to look up this word dissimulation. It means concealment of one's thoughts, feelings, or character. So as you see, the Clarke has already noted that the civilized part was mistakenly perceived as Moscow. But he goes on. In the more northern provinces, he is cautioned to beware of the inhabitants of Ukraine and the Cossacks by the unprincipled race of men with whom the Cossack and the Tatars are degraded in comparison. Yeah, the English back then was way harder to understand than now. We met frequent caravans of Malorussians, aka Ukrainians, who differ altogether from the inhabitants of the rest of Russia. Differ altogether. Their features are those of Polonese or Cossacks. They're a much more noble race and stouter and better-looking people than the Russians, and superior to them in everything that can exalt one set of men above another. They are cleaner, more industrious, more honest, more generous, more polite, more courageous, more hospitable, more truly pious, and of course, less superstitious. Yeah, I guess 200 years ago, they completely didn't care about political correctness. I believe him to be a Russian, sustaining his national characteristic by a valedictory theft, as our time remaining among them was now drawing to a close. So he's saying that theft is their national characteristic, and because something was stolen from him, he believes that those people were Russians. But I was afterwards informed, and indeed, the man's conduct seemed to prove it, that his design was to assassinate. Yeah, Muscovites don't hold human life in hard regard at all. Among the Russians, indeed, we were constantly exposed to danger, either from imposition, which it was hazardous to detect, or from insult it was fearful to resent. And in both cases, the consequences affected our security. So this is really complex grammar, but what he's saying there, when he knew that he was being lied to, he couldn't call it out because it was dangerous to his life. And when he was insulted, he did not fight back because he knew it was dangerous. In conversation, the Cossack is a gentleman, for he is well-informed, free from prejudice, open, sincere, and upright. Place him by the side of a Russian, what a contrast! The one is literally a two-legged pig, having all the brutality but more knavery than the animal. The other, a rational, accomplished, and valuable member of society. I would not believe my eyes that this was actually written in American newspaper by British clergyman, naturalist, mineralogist, and traveler Edward Clarke, who has witnessed that with his own eyes. I have no reason to doubt what he is saying. No reason at all. Because, as I keep repeating in my videos, Moscow Empire has been exactly the same since its inceptions. And what we see today is exactly what it was all this time before it. It just has adopted to new technologies. James Henry Skene, the British writer and diplomat, who has traveled to those lands, and this is where my opening quote for this episode was from. Here he writes about Ukrainian Cossacks of the Zaporizhia region, and here he's writing about the free nature, electing their own officers and paying themselves as they can. Yeah, Muscovites, after they ruined the Ukrainian Cossack hosts, they have been exploding the remnants of Cossacks to their ways. Unfortunately, they have pitted Ukrainian Cossacks against the indigenous people of Caucasus. Yeah, and Muscovites are really good at pitting people against others. Like what they're doing now in Crimea and in Donbass. They're using Ukrainians from the occupied territories against Ukraine. But now here's where interesting part says, beside this, they are Ruthenians, and though of common Slavonic origin, there is neither sympathy nor resemblance between that tribe and the Muscovites. Amen to that. There's neither a sympathy nor resemblance between us. Another witness testimony. There's neither sympathy or resemblance between that tribe and the Muscovites who inhabit the more northern parts of the empire. The 10 millions of free peasantry in Russia are all Ruthenians. They are bold and warlike, and they are of an adventurous disposition, while the Muscovites are timid and pacific. They are physically strong and morally independent. But the Russian serfs are diminutive in person and degraded in character. And the Ruthenians, like the 1,000 branches of the Slavonic race, are now awakening to a sense of their own worth, a strong feeling against the Russian domination having arisen among them, where the Muscovites appear to be incapable of even aspiring at freedom, far less of making an effort to achieve it. Amen to that. This is exactly what is not changing today. And now for the most amazing quote in this whole episode. The Ruthenians thus owe Russia the existence of her empire. For her conquest of Siberia and the northern provinces of Persia could not have been achieved without them. By them, may that empire be one day overthrown. Amen to that. And as I mentioned in my episode, Opening Your Eyes to Russia, we Ukrainians consider Moscovia as our colony that went completely rogue. And we have this saying, Kiev has baptized Moscow, and Kiev will sing its requiem, which perfectly aligns with James Henry Skene's The Frontier Lands. Oh, and by the way, did you notice the confusion? Ruthenians, Russians, Moscow, Muscovites, all those labels. Cannot help to mention this again. And this French map by Casimir Delamare, right here. On the sidelines, he clearly says right here, between Moscovia and Polonia, there are Russians, people whose name Muscovites usurped by conquering them. And you can understand that even without knowing French. Usurped, conquerat, Russes, entre la Moscovia y la Polonia. Well, actually, this is a Spanish accent. But, yeah, right there he also writes about the confusion. He writes here that Ruthenian does not understand Russian. And this is the point of extreme importance because this intentional confusion of the word Russe is of the greatest means of manipulation of the government of St. Petersburg and the real key to pan-Slavism. And something that foreigners will not understand, it's all the confusion in terms of translation. Because in the original language, their country is not even called Russia. It is called Россия. It's like a completely different word. But in English, they actually kept the same word as it was used for Rus, Russia. So anyway, let's go further. Alexander Muravyev, Russian statesman and politician, participant of the Patriotic War of 1812. And here, after Belgorod, I'm in this green wilderness through which you rush through, north and south collide before your eyes. Two populations, utterly different in spirit and character, advancing towards one another, embodying a striking opposition. Like, I mean, come on. He could have not said it more clearly, more specifically, that Ukrainians and so-called Russians are different people. But I have more. Let's keep going. Lado Vitaly, a Russian teacher and writer, private counselor, in his notes, Европейская Россия, European Russia, he says right here, just as the southern nature of European Russia does not resemble the northern, so too does the Little Russian people differ from the Great Russian in physical constitution, language, character, customs, and manner. The difference between the Great Russian and the Little Russian appears even more striking when comparing their characters. It is impossible not to notice certain traits that sharply distinguish those two peoples. The Ukrainians saw that they have been deceived by their neighbor and offended in their sincere but naive trust, came to strongly dislike the Muscovites. Even today, the very word Moscow provokes a deeply negative reaction from a Ukrainian. It reminds them of someone utterly unworthy of trust. A good man, but a Moscow. Or, be friends with a Moscow, but keep a stone under your coat, the Ukrainian says, and with these proverbs, he best expresses his view on the Muscovite. Amen to that. We Ukrainians have forgot that wisdom. We have started trusting them again. We thought that they would have never invaded. I thought that they would have never invaded. But see, my ancestors knew that. And unfortunately, this chain of generational wisdom was cut. But let's keep reading. The Muscovites, however, pay little attention to how badly they are viewed, and instead ease their conscience by mocking the hochhols, telling countless jokes in which Ukrainians are invariably portrayed as short-sighted or even stupid. I'm into that, and they're doing those degradatory jokes in modern times as well. They're putting us down because they want to devalue us. And they want to devalue us because they're jealous of us. They're jealous because we, Ukrainians, have the freedom to elect our own government. And they are serfs just watching from the sidelines. And from this jealousy arises hatred. And from this hatred that is so immense arises the desire to devalue the object that triggers their hatred. Thus, literally, if you go on Moscovian internet, you will see so many deranged jokes about Ukrainians. Okay, but let's continue. Yet, however funny the jokes may be, they don't speak well of the Muscovites, since mocking the weak is never honorable, especially when Ukrainians are not only equal to Muscovites in intelligence, but often surpass them. The proof is in many great figures in history and literature who came from Ukraine. Muscovites may have diverse talents, but they only grasp the surface of things. They lack the strength and persistence with which Ukrainians pursue a matter to its core and truly master it. That's why there are many capable Muscovites, but among Ukrainians there are geniuses. Even among Muscovites there were honorable people who do recognize that actually laughing and putting down people is not honorable. But unfortunately, such people who have dignity, they're a drop in the ocean. Well, anyway, here we have Peter Gilterbrand. Doesn't sound like a Slavic name. Russian historian, philologist, paleographer. He seems to have some science background, so his testimony would be more credible. They live separately from one another, implying Ukrainians and Muscovites. Do not intermarry, except in very rare cases, and do not intermingle. One priest said that in 8 years of service, he had performed only a single marriage between a Great Russian widow and a discharged Little Russian soldier. The Great Russian and the Little Russian each preserved their own speech, character, and customs. The Little Russian borrowed absolutely nothing in return. We're getting closer to the 19th century. Emelian Ogonovsky, writer, public figure, philologist. His last name is Armenian, and he was born in Austro-Hungary, of what today is actually Ukraine. But here he says, the fate of Ukrainian people who have their own history, its own worldview, its own language. In this piece of text, he's differentiating. And here he says, our people in Ukraine lost their autonomy, which had been won through bloody battles and secured by treaties. And, quote, younger and more stronger brother, end quote, appropriated to himself the people's name Rus. That brother uses our old literature and tells to the world that Rus-Ukraine is the real Russia. Such dictator-like decision is promoted by Moscovian panslavists. It just so brilliantly rhymes with Casimir de la Mare. It so brilliantly rhymes with everything that I say. Here's the alphabetical list of peoples inhabiting the Russian Empire. And all Moscovian sources that were ever printed went through censorship, by the way. And right here in the section about Little Russians, there are really interesting things to note about. The Little Russians themselves differ sharply from the Great Russians. And so do their villages, which do not resemble those in central Russia. Instead of rows of log cabins, they are picturesque clusters of houses made from clay and straw. The economic life of Little Russians has its own character. The communal farming does not exist here. Every young man, upon marrying, becomes an independent landowner. It differs from the Great Russian version. Specifically, the Little Russian Hromada consists of independent owners. This is what I was saying in my previous segment. And here I bolded in red. Right here it says, Little Russians are called Rusins, basically confirming the lineage. Rusins, then Moscow artificially labeled those people as Little Russians, called themselves Great Russians, supposedly invented this trio of one nation, Little Russians, Belarusians, Great Russians, that supposedly are all Russians. It's all a myth created by that Catherine. But anyway, here's another interesting note from, I believe he actually traveled those lands, or someone traveled those lands, and they documented how the Great Russians looked. And as you can see, there is not a single Slavic appearance here. Because let me remind you, Slavic people, they wear flowers on their hats. Women wear flowers, not whatever that calls. Oh, right here. This is from the same universal history, Polish types of Little Russia. So he calls them Polish type because Poland at the time owned part of Ukraine. And as you can see, flowers and different kinds of hats, different... You can point blank see the difference. Okay, a few more. Textbook of the Yekaterinslav Women Gymnasium by Stepanova. She was researching the inhabitants of Yekaterinslav government, which I showing you here. It was in eastern Ukraine, where some parts be settled by Great Russians and other consist of Little Russians. Both groups wear the national costumes, each speaks their own language. And although they go to the same church, it sometimes happens that they venerate different saints. The Great Russians called Little Russians Hofols, the degraded, while the latter in turn called the Great Russians Katsaps. And so far, no real merging between those nationalities have been observed. Sometimes in the same village, Great Russians, Little Russians, and Serbs live side by side, and all three nationalities retain their distinct identities. All right, another evidence, another witness testimonial, ethnographer, folklorist, historian, literary scholar, educator, and museum expert. He says right here, for centuries, Great Russians have lived alongside Little Russians in shared natural and economic conditions, without mixing, remaining nationally distinct, but not without mutual influence. And, as will be noted later, Little Russian influence significantly prevails. Judging by Ludza, which is the village that I marked here, as you can see, it's almost at the border now, the Great Russian enclave appears in many ways to have submitted to Ukrainian nationality. In everyday life, songs, beliefs, and rituals, the only marked distinction remains in the women's costumes. So, as you can see, distinctions are so apparent, but in fact, Ukrainian love for their culture influences the others. I have another theory about that because Great Russians is artificially constructed nationality. It's assembled from all different parts of other nationalities. So it feels artificial. It's really hard to love it. Okay, another one, Russian anarchist and geographer, a proponent of anarchist communities. Little Russian or Ukrainian, which is spoken by nearly 15 million people and has its own literature, folklore, and modern, is undoubtedly a separate language, in the same sense as Norwegian and Danish are separate from Swedish, or as Portuguese and Catalonian are separate from that. Yeah, I totally agree here. I totally agree with these comparisons. Little Russia differs considerably from the central parts of the empire, meaning from the country around Moscow, which is known as Great Russia. It has more of a southern position, and everything southern has always a certain attraction for the northerner. The villages in Little Russia are not disposed in streets as they are in Great Russia, but the whitewashed houses are scattered, as in Western Europe, in separate little farms, each of which is surrounded by charming little gardens. Besides, life in Little Russian villages is more poetic than it is in the villages of Great Russia. There is more freedom in the relations between the young men and the young girls who freely meet before marriage. Little Russians have also maintained numerous traditions and epic poems and songs from the times when they were free Cossacks and used to fight against the Poles in the north and the Turks in the south. The Little Russian language is certainly more melodious than the Great Russian. Alright, so that's that. If you're curious, you can always pause and read more of that. Quickly fixed right now. A Romanian and Soviet communist politician, 1928. So, almost 100 years ago. Russians and Ukrainians are indeed related by origin, but can we say that they are one nationality? Of course not. Only the Tsarist autocracy and its policy of suppressing national life could call Ukrainians Little Russians. Amen to that. Russians and Ukrainians are two different peoples, and today no one doubts that. And today there are millions of people, millions of so-called Russians, who really believe we are the same people.
Do you believe Russians and Ukrainians are one people?
In my opinion, we are one people.
Do you consider Russians and Ukrainians to be one people?
Of course.
And I wish they could just find their own set of values, their own historical foundation on which they can firmly stand, because that foundation was stolen from them by those myths. So they clung to the myths because that's the only thing they have, and they're too afraid to look in the mirror and see the reality. To my critics and skeptics, do you really find it that hard to believe that an empire rewrote its own history? Can you name me a single empire that did not exaggerate its victories, downplay its defeats, or tamper with its past? Moscow's historical revisionism is not unique. But what's unique and astounding is how their absurd lies have survived this long, even in the age of the internet. Today, unlike just even a decade ago, anyone can read online old Russian chronicles and see for themselves. The territory where Muscovy arose was a conquered colony of Kiev. It was populated by Turco-Finnish tribes who did not speak a Slavic language and resisted Christianization. In the age of the internet, anyone can find a Wikipedia page called Jericho Caps of the Russian Tsars, on which you can see Arab scriptures that read, Allah, there is no deity except Him, the ever-living, the ever-existing. There is just an overwhelming amount of evidence out there in the cloud, accessible in just few clicks for those who are looking for the truth. I have a really brilliant analogy of what's really going on. Londinium was founded by Romans. Moscow was supposedly founded by real Russians. England was a Roman colony. Zalicia was a Russian colony. England was heavily influenced by the Romans. Zalicia was heavily influenced by real Russians. So imagine this, 500 years after the Rome fell, England rebrands itself as the Roman Republic and starts calling its people Romans, conquers Italy, and then Keith Starmer today claims that Italians and Romans are the same people. Sounds absurd, but it is exactly what Moscovia is doing right now. The lie is really big, but just because it's really big, it doesn't become the truth. Now, under my last video, the three main points of criticism that I got were the thumbnail is biased, I'm dehumanizing the so-called Russians, and I'm spreading propaganda. I got comments like,
thumbnail shows us as cool, kind, and nice Chads, while them as angry, evil Wojaks.
WTF is that thumbnail? Jesus Christ, you couldn't make it any more xenophobic.
The video thumbnail looks like 1930s German propaganda.
Well, let me explain to those who are genuinely curious. The reason why so many people cannot grasp the essence of what so-called Russia is that this empire operates on two layers. The first layer is the facade, the parades with armada tanks, the high moral talk of law and justice, the appeal for family values, for tolerance, for freedom, the loud words of protecting the Russian-speaking people of Donbass, the so-called great culture, and many other myths that, like Lego pieces, construct this exaggerated facade. Now, the second layer is actual reality. Soldiers storming positions on scooters and ladders, missiles deliberately fired on civilians, the utter destruction and mass murder of Russian-speaking people of Donbass, government-doped athletes, armies of hackers, trolls, bots, and spies seeking to bring chaos, corruption of literally every single institution, the rot of every single moral pillar. That's the second layer. If Moscow would be a human, it would have a face that is psychopathic, as it has never been in touch with its own human side. It would have a face that has fear frozen all over it, as it is scared to look in the mirror. It would have a face that is covered in layers and layers of blood from millions and millions of humans that it murdered over centuries of its existence. It would have a face that is infuriated from all the immense hatred boiling within it, but that face would be covered by a shiny mask that is pure, innocent, and smiling. And so many people, myself included before the war, only saw that mask. They didn't see a country as corrupt as Lebanon. They saw a rising power. They didn't see the utter poverty. They looked at the rich capital of the empire and thought it was the whole country. They didn't see the army failing to protect its own borders in Kursk. They saw a mighty force which had no equals on the continent. They didn't see elites throwing naked parties. They believed the talk about traditional values. We all saw what Kremlin wanted us to see, a facade they've been carefully constructing for centuries. Senator McCain saw those layers before us. He was so right about it being the gas station masquerading as a country, because it's 100% just that, an empire incapable of producing anything good. And if it did manage to produce something good, it was either stolen or copied, like the first man in space is the result of Ukrainian scientists and Germans' work appropriations. See the full depths of this masquerade in my video, What Russia Really Is. But see, we saw all those myths from afar. But imagine how affected are people who grow up under those myths, who were raised under those lies from childhood. For such unfortunate people who were born there, those myths became a part of their personal identity. They refused to see their motherland for what it really is, as it would crumble their illusions of themselves. But no matter how good those illusions are built, they are still not real. And what's real is what I depicted on my thumbnail. Such is the bitter truth that modern Russians have no courage to face. What's real is that being the richest country on earth in terms of natural resources, millions of its people live without sewage, running water, or proper waste disposal. They endure what can only be called structural neglect of every human condition. Millions of them are cramped into the collapsing barracks, poisoned by nearby industries, and are fed 24/7 a constant diet of hate-infused damning propaganda. By the way, check out my top 10 most trash examples of Russian propaganda. But see, the worst part of it all is that this population is content to live the way they live. They're not fighting for themselves. They're not rising up for their rights, for their dignity, for their children, for Christ's sake. They prefer to live in chains. It's their choice. They choose to run away from truth. They choose to not look in the mirror. And you might think that this madness, this war, is just some temporary Putin-only phenomena. But you would be wrong. This is permanent, anti-human system that was established from its very inception centuries ago. For its entire history, Moscow has treated its people as disposable resource, from early princes kneeling to the horde, to Stalin, to Putin, and to even Yeltsin, who spoke of democracy, but at the same time drowned Moldova, Chechnya, and Georgia in blood, and who attempted to annex Crimea already in the 90s. The so-called Russia was never different from what it is today. It was just weaker or stronger. And when it was weaker, it was trying to make agreements and play by the rules. But as soon as it was getting stronger, mostly because of the Western help, it would immediately start showing its real anti-human nature.
The thumbnail alone should let you know how tainted this video is and comes off as biased and propaganda, dehumanizing the enemy.
An absolutely shameless example of a cheap dehumanization tactic.
This thumbnail and my videos do not dehumanize. They reflect the dehumanization that's already happened. Like, did I force the Muscovite officer to pit his men in a death match?
Whoever kills gets to get out from this pit.
Did I command those Muscovites to cut off the testicles of Ukrainian warrior? Or cut off the head of a living man?
Horrifying level of depravity.
Too gruesome to air, in this series of still frames, a man wearing military fatigues is seen using a knife to cut off the head of another man in army uniform. From the voices on the recording, it seems the victim was still alive as the beheading began.
Am I responsible for this Moscovian commander to gut the dog and film the process? And now he's the platoon commander in a Russian army? Or it not Russians who packed the food with explosives for a polar bear and recorded it suffer? Or did I make them cut swastikas in dogs and humans? Did I make them use a soldering iron to write "Glory to Russia" on a human flesh? Was it me who killed a man with radioactive polonium and made the murderers esteemed members of parliament? Is it me who is glorifying suicide by erecting monuments? Is it me who is letting cannibals, murderers, maniacs, rapists from prisons so that they can kill even more people in a neighboring country? Is it me who made her wear a t-shirt saying, "Massacre in Bucha, we can repeat"? Or it not the modern Russians who did the massacre in the first place? Is it me who treats them as livestock, exchanging 20,000 souls for the ruins of Bakhmut, or hundreds of thousands of souls for the ruins of Chechnya, or 150,000 of souls for the peace of Finland in 1939? Is it me who pays taxes to this evil empire and refuses to recognize it for what it really is? Is it me who placed those Russian wannabes in the shape of modern swastika? Even in the recent news that just came out, the key figure responsible for shooting down the Azeris plane was not punished, but promoted. So tell me, was it me who promoted the murderer of 62 people? And by the way, the murderer of civilians in Bucha was also promoted. So, was it me who dehumanized the modern Russians to fall so low? No, I simply hold the mirror for those willing to look. And then, of course, I get all those accusations devoid of substance.
I hate stupid Ukrainian propaganda.
Ukrainians don't realize that Ukrainian propaganda exists. They think that Yaroslav makes counter-propaganda.
Good old Goebbels propaganda.
Let me ask you, what am I propagating in my videos? Is it truth, reason, respect to international law, respect to human rights? If that's the case, then yes, I am propagating that. But in reality, such accusations reveal the pain hiding underneath. And I hear it. And I agree. The situation is really ugly. But without accepting reality as it is, there is just no way forward to improve things. Until Muscovites will accept the truth about their state, about their history, they will never improve. And they will stay absolutely the same, obedient to their masters, including the truth that they were raised on myth, which turned them into the imposters. However, there was one attempt at constructive critique of my video, the screenshots of which you can see right now, and you can pause to read them. And I also want to add that I do not hate so-called Russia, like many might think. No more than I would hate an earthquake. Granted, earthquakes don't deliberately target hospitals, they do not tie the hands before killing, they do not feed on human suffering. So, in a way, I think of Moscow Empire as a malignant force of nature, as an evil earthquake with an epicenter in Kremlin. So, there is no hate, just clarity of mind, what we must do to stop its destructive pulses from reaching us. Lastly, I'd like to invite everybody for a live stream. I will be reviewing a video by Moscow Mapper where he critiques my video, Theft of Millennia. I haven't seen it yet. I took a glance and I saw it dripping with the same kinds of myths and truth distortion. So let's all watch it live together. And I will answer as many questions as I can. So check the pinned comment below for the exact date and time of the live stream. Thank you all for watching, and a special thank you to my Patreon subscribers. I'm truly grateful for your support. You now have an updated access to Historical Collection 2.0, which includes the witness testimonials featured in this video. And if you found this episode valuable and would like to support more work like this, please consider subscribing to Patreon or donating via Buy Me a Coffee or right here on YouTube. Every bit helps to grow this channel. And maybe you've noticed that my previous video on this subject had a different editing style. That's because I hired an editor, which costed me $500, something I can't really afford to do regularly just yet. Every other video on this channel was edited by me, which sometimes, together with research, could take months of work. But with your support, I'll be able to release more videos even while having a full-time job, which is building websites. And if by chance you're looking for premium WordPress hosting, the best of the best, Kinsta, you can check out the affiliate link in the description below. I would greatly appreciate it, and I could advise you on any questions that you might have. And also, I want to try something new. Who knows, maybe it will work. If you'd like to commission a video, I created a new tier on Patreon for $1,000. You pick a topic and I'll research and produce at least a 15-minute video within 2 months. Or you can choose a topic from my own bucket list, so find out more on my Patreon. Тим, хто розуміє українську, я також хочу порекомендувати свій канал «Дикий мудрець» і особливо відео про Трамп, чому і як американці обрали такого президента. Thank you all for watching. Sic Semper Tyrannis.